Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. How's everybody doing?
Great.
Yeah? Right on. Okay, let's jump into it. This is a panel about agentic AI. These folks are going to help us understand that, and we are really lucky to have, I'm going to start from that end, Josh Joseph, who's BKC's Chief AI Scientist. We have Jordi, who everybody knows is BKC Senior Advisor and Lecturer of Law. We have Aileen Nielsen, Visiting Assistant Professor of Law, and we have Professor Mickens. Welcome back to the panel. So we're going to do this one slightly differently. We have invited our guest. We're going to do this more like podcast style. So if you see people like interrupting each other, jumping in, we're going to try it that way. And then we're actually going to invite all of you to become our agents about halfway through the panel. And so come ready with questions, and we're going to make it a little bit more interactive. So thanks for being here, everybody. Without further ado, so the word AI agent, quote unquote agent, is thrown around a lot these days. What the hell is an agent? Maybe each of you could just kind of go down and just like, what is your understanding of what these systems are? Is agent even the right word? What does that imply? And what sort of like concerns you or is fundamentally different about quote unquote agentic AI? Josh, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. So for our class, Agentic AI in the Law, Jordi, Jay-Z, and I taught in the spring, we had this reading from like '96, which was like, is it an agent or is it a computer program? That we've like all been struggling with since like '96, and we still don't know. But more seriously answer, like what's new, maybe I'll answer first, is like large language models. And like, so how has that changed things? To me, I would say two ways. One is that natural language to like well-defined instruction is now much easier to do. The large language model can sort of handle that, which makes it easier to build some of these systems. And then also just a lot lower bar to something that looks like multi-step planning. We can argue about planning means and all of that, but also sort of capability that we didn't have before, which sort of now we have these systems that can to some degree sort of take multi-step action in the world and sort of bring about some desired sort of target world state. Now, maybe the thing, because I know you encouraged a little bit of spiciness, maybe the
Spicy.
The thing that I think is maybe different is like, when I use some of these systems, direct experience, like deep research, quad code, like computer use models, like I think words like quirky and even like not quite, Jay-Z's thing he says often of tool versus friend. I think not quite friend, but there is, I would say, a feel of like something closer to individual happening. And to me, that's like maybe what is starting to feel different. It's not just like a tool sort of anymore. And there's something more like an individual, whatever we might mean by that. So looking forward to arguing about that one.
So one of the features of our class is that we went the entire term with many very smart people never really landing on a definition of what agentic AI is. And so, Josh has maybe like a technical approach. I look at it in a couple of ways that are important to me. First is just like, how do you say, what do people mean? I think right now there's like a hype component of what people mean, and there's a lot of things that are called agentic that are maybe not when we break it down into mechanics of the thing. So, I naturally question almost every time I see something called agentic until I see what actually it does. Now, for me personally, what interests me is like one component of agency, which is a thing acting upon the world on its own. So there's components of at the behest of others and giving some sort of instructions, but maybe not too specific. But to me, just the fact that something is going out into the world on its own is really important, and what I think of when I think of agentic AI, and I think of what I care most about, which is in its impact on law and society. Our legal system is built around people, and then we like cobble together corporations, which is a collection of people, and then so you interact with them. There's ways that they can hurt you. There's ways they can help you. There are ways that we can redress those pains, and now we are having things, we've had animals too, but we are now having things that can go about the world and impact your life. And it may be 1 degree of separation from a person or a corporation, but it may be 20, or it may be 10,000 degrees of separation. And so to me, when I think of agentic AI and I think of its promises and its pitfalls, that's the part that I focus on, even though the full definition, Jay-Z's 3-part definition, Josh has got definitions, there's so many, are valid.
So I'm glad Jordi brought up pitfalls. I think I teach sports and privacy law and spend most of my time thinking about how we hurt one another. Not that that's the typical or desired behavior, but it's what I have learned to plan for. And I also heard tool versus friend, and so I initially thought tool versus enemy. Well, no, that's too strong. Maybe tool versus counterparty. I do private law, and I'm thinking of all the ways taking the sort of entity notion seriously, not legal personhood. I'm so tired of hearing about that for AI, but just entity, right? Something distinct with its own interests that can coincide or be adverse, that can be manipulated or engineered by a variety of actors for a variety of reasons. And I think, the law has all sorts of ways to think about relationships between counterparties that very much represent to me the different ways we can either anticipate or desire that we're going to have agents in the world, right? So they can be agents in the legal sense and hopefully serve our interests, but they can be adversaries in various ways, or there can be different degrees of responsibility and ability, right? So they could be proxies, they could be bailees, right? They could be trustees. We have all sorts of relationships with counterparties that have different degrees of freedom or responsibility, different concerns we have about how it could go wrong or the wonderful ways it could go right. And so when I think of agent, and especially the ideas people have rather than the technical reality, I think we should start introducing more granularity into this in practice and thinking about what kind of relationship exactly do we want to have? What are we seeking exactly from this entity in this particular use?
Yeah, I would say that, first of all, trust no one. Don't be the algorithm person. People say agent, what does it mean? Doesn't mean a gosh darn thing. Because in some sense, we've had these programs that people interact with for a very long time. We've had systems that can sort of reason autonomously or semi-autonomously for a long time. Like most airplanes, for example, right now, you don't directly fly them. They're making thousands of miniature adjustments all the time to make sure the plane doesn't crash, so on and so forth. Kind of like Jordi was mentioning, some people argue that corporations are a form of artificial intelligence, or a sports team, because they can also reason in ways that seem human-like. I think there's a lot of Bay Area hype around agents as they're code that does stuff independently for you. Day traders have had those for a long time. I think that, however, what Josh was saying was really important, which is that I think the fact that these agents now can be directed via what seems like a reasonable natural language, that's really the thing that has caused sort of this phase transition from saying I'm interacting with a program versus I'm interacting with a thing that seems more human-like. And then there's sort of just the semantic question of what is a noun that captures that more human-like quality, and people seem to have sort of landed on agent. But I think it's also important to realize that we can think about the harms and the benefits of this new type of AI without adjudicating any of the philosophical questions about is the model alive, or is it a person, or is it a... You say it's a thing in the world, it can do and cannot do certain things, let's reason at that level.
Well, let's build on that hype question, and Josh might beg to differ about the sort of animation of the agent too, but we can get there. But just to kind of build on the hype question, and I think also some of the things you raised about sort of the sort of interactability and almost democratization of these things out of sort of particular domains are really interesting. But it feels like there's so much hype about agents. I'm curious from each of you, what do you see as underplayed and huge gaps in the public discourse about these things that we should be paying attention to right now? And what is overhyped, over-indexed in the public conversation right now that you think people are just paying way too much attention to and is almost kind of a distraction?
As I already said, I think a lot of things that are called agents aren't, and that itself is hype and distraction. And a lot of times what companies or individuals may be trying to pass off things that are being done by them ultimately. When James talks about the plane does fly itself, but you know who's doing it. It's the airline's doing it. But as companies develop agentic products, if you start looking at sort of their terms of service and things like that, they're trying to say, oh, we're not really doing this. Our agent's doing it, and they're trying to separate themselves. And so, to me, the term agent really itself is a hype mechanism for now. Which is a very broad answer, but yeah.
I think I'd probably build on that too, and just reinforce what is the particular system that we're thinking about and just trying to unpack. Are we talking about deep research? Are we talking about Waymos? Like any of those? And then maybe the thing that I think about is Tesla's theorem of AI is anything that hasn't been done yet, and a little bit of to me at least driving in a Waymo is incredible. It's just amazing, an amazing experience. And as someone worked on the DARPA Grand Challenge way back in the day when you're driving around the desert.
My wife would agree with you, by the way. I should not be driving.
So
the Waymo was good.
It's amazing. I hear they're mapping Boston these days. I don't know if they're coming. Or deep research, that it's just kind of boring. But after that fifth or seventh Waymo ride, it's a little boring. At least was nice. But to be mindful in this moment of these are amazing, to me, amazing things that work, that are just kind of all right, I'll throw it at deep research and it'll make some mistakes, but it's incredible to me that that worked, or that works.
I want to jump on the note of optimism, right? So I think we are not celebrating enough the very small mundane gains that we have had, right? We're so busy often sort of moving the goalpost, right? It's the whole intelligence is what the machine can't do yet. So in some ways we want to say the agent is what can't be done yet. I'm waiting for the agent that will actually make my doctor's appointments, and it is not here yet. But I don't know about others in the room. I've certainly experienced substantial work efficiency gains that have all been thanks to agents. On the other hand, the flip side of that, what I think we're not talking about enough, in part because it takes a very special and innovative sort of mind that I don't have to come up with these ideas, but we're not talking about the kinds of new work we're going to be able to do. So I think the efficiency gains we've had that are mundane are too little celebrated, but at the same time, maybe we're not being imaginative enough about sort of qualitatively new things we could do with agentic AI, right? Not just coding better. Can we talk about something that isn't just better, faster, more, and talk more about what could be qualitatively different?
Anyone who knows me, at least once every conversation, I bring up late stage capitalism. And in terms of, again, it's a hot take. We've been encouraged by the moderator to give hot takes. But maybe the new type of work that AI is going to invent is new ways to be poor. I think if you look at a main reason why you see agents everywhere and AI everywhere is because these companies view AI as being the operating system for your life in a way that Microsoft never could have imagined back when they were pushing Windows and they were a monopoly, right? So as many of you may know, Perplexity, OpenAI, they have come out and they have said that we want to have a phone where the only app on your phone is our AI app. And then all the conversations with the backend APIs happen through our app. Now, if you are, a monocle wearer and you have a Zeppelin, this sounds amazing to you, right? Because AI becomes the funnel to everything, And so I agree with a lot of the things that were set up here. When I was a kid, I would watch sci-fi movies. They'd have, universal translators and stuff like that. That stuff is real now. That is objectively amazing. But I also find, and this isn't even this is what I actually believe. I go to my friends in the Bay Area sometimes, and I'm like, you're automating yourself out of existence. It is strange to me from the biological imperative perspective that people would sometimes work so hard to make themselves obsolete. That's just me. Maybe I'm a Luddite, I should be in a cave somewhere. People always say, oh, you would have made fun of cars. You would prefer to stay with a horse and buggy. I think they're qualitatively different, though. I think this gets to the point of, what is an agent? What makes this new? I wasn't afraid of fly-by-wire airplanes in the same way that I'm afraid of LLMs, because I think there's a qualitative difference there. And so to me, I think the thing that people aren't focusing on enough is the fact that when you look at a lot of these AI agents, there's a question of who do they benefit? And there's sort of like a short-term immediate benefit, which is that, oh, now I can basically speak German now. Which is that's amazing. But like medium to long term, am I speaking German underneath the bridge because I don't have a job? And like, as a technologist, I'm lucky to be able to say like, oh, I could probably pivot. There are already people who are losing their job right now. And like the extent to which you think that like UBI is going to become a thing, there's like some land I'd like to sell you. So I'm actually a little bit worried about what the impact of this is going to be on the economy. I think that is being under discussed right now because I think we do sort of assume, particularly in the United States, that all progress is good progress.
Yeah, tying this to what Josh was saying about the Waymos, because I think about concentration of power. I was speaking with an executive at Google, who's a friend of mine, and he was like, I don't understand why everyone is so worried about AI and what's coming to us. And he was dismissive about all kinds of things. But he was the one person, he was like, the concentration of like us controlling more is probably bad. And the thing is that I think about, once upon a time, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, there were taxi companies and there were a lot of them, and they maybe there was a taxi king who had 100 taxis, but they were all these businesses that were smaller businesses where there were people making decisions and they were making themselves somewhat wealthy and whatever. And then you have Uber and you have Lyft, and then we still have humans driving, and so now they have jobs, but they don't have the autonomy that they had before, and that power is being concentrated to Uber and Lyft. And then you have Waymo, and there's now no drivers, and so like the amount of money going to the tip of the accelerationist spear goes up and up and up. But the amount of money that is distributed in a way that is not just, even if you have a UBI where it's like we just hand out money, but there is power in having decision making and power in being able to run your own thing and power in knowing who you work for. And with Waymo, I mean, the number of people that are actually doing it are highly compensated, but is nothing like the cabs of the olden days. And so I really worry. I mean, people who know me know this. I worry all the time about concentration of power.
So like actually that raises a question for me is like, are agents going to increase our agency, or are they going to take it away? And where?
Sounds like Reid Hoffman, who's got his book Super Agency, so Reid is, and we're leaning on Jay-Z's triad, whatever, accelerationists and safetyists and skeptics, and Reid is very much a accelerationist, and he came out with this book called Super Agency, and the whole which he wrote with AI, which is that public? I think it's public. Yeah,
it is now.
Everyone starts tweeting.
And it's all about that that you can speak German now, and that maybe there are new jobs that will emerge, and you're saying we need to figure out what those jobs are, and so for him, he sees all these powers. He can send you individualized copies of his book, which I may know about, and with like pictures of you in it and poems about you in it and things like that. And that's such a superpower, but it's really easy to do that when you're a billionaire. And if you're the graphic designer who works at MIT Press, maybe you're a little worried. So to me, it can be both. It is amazing. It is like the things I can do. I made a sculpture this weekend, a 3D sculpture of my kid, just like out of that. It was awesome. So cool. But okay, I have a plastic sculpture, and now some company in China has a 3D model of my kid's face. So
I think what I'm hearing here is very much in line with the scholarship, right? So the scholarship in this area has very much had these concerns about concentration of power. My pushback, which I may or may not sincerely ask rather than to provoke, is to what extent do you think our sort of pessimistic or resigned discourse itself might shape outcomes? Because I think that's a separate concern and something over which we have more agency potentially. Not to oversell the optimism, but might we be doing it to ourselves?
well, we might be doing it to ourselves in the Berkman Klein Center, but in Silicon Valley, the 8 million people trying to start a new company on their own, I mean, half of my students want to, are thinking about leaving, and some of them already have to start their own thing. So there is, there's plenty of optimism, and I don't think they necessarily think they're going to be the billionaire.
Sorry to interrupt, although I was
No,
able to.
yes.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
So are
Free
you
encourage.
telling me that Silicon Valley is cannibalizing the Harvard Law student population and we are not fighting back effectively?
That is a hot take that I will perhaps endorse.
And are we doing it to ourselves by producing the kind of scholarship that they're definitely gonna win in the end? Are we doing it to ourselves, or can we act more effectively to counter this? Or should we counter it, and maybe we should be losing ourselves?
I mean, I don't know that it's the scholarship that's telling those students to go. I think that it's the media and the perception of this is the way that people will be successful in the future. Like, I think the scholarship, to the contrary, says y'all need to be careful, y'all need to watch out. But I think that the students, and I speak here, particularly coming from the perspective of a computer science professor, and I think law students are more well-read on some of this stuff, but I talk to CS students all the time who are like, look man, I'm gonna be on that first spaceship to Mars with Elon, I'm gonna go out to the Bay Area, I'm gonna create like Grok 18, it's gonna be great. And they have like all these like futurist, accelerationist tendencies, and like, but they haven't read a book. Like these are my people, so I feel they're not a protected class. I feel comfortable saying that. They haven't read a book. If it is, it's Atlas Shrugged. And so the problem then is that like it's not that somehow like they are aware of the literature and they choose to distance themselves from it. They are aware of the narrative, which is that, for a certain type of, and like I say, it's once again also being a Harvard professor, right? So it's, this is like a storied institution, and it used to be in World War II, a lot of Harvard people went to go to the CIA. It used to be that a lot of Harvard people would go to the military, things like that. Then it became consulting, and now you see the eye of sort of credentialed Sauron turning towards AI stuff. So I would actually agree that if you look at the literature says be a little bit careful. If you look at the Zeitgeist though, the larger Zeitgeist says, go west, young person, and go find some weights and put them in the cloud.
Josh, you're closer to the Zeitgeist than we probably are. What's your read?
Yeah, I mean, broadly agree, makes a ton of sense. A lot of experience with similar computer science folks who I also view as my people to a large degree, not speaking negative, I guess, in that way, but also.
Yeah, I was speaking negatively.
I guess maybe what that made me think of, and a little bit to your original question, Alex, about agency, it does kind of ground out in this way. We were talking about like individual systems. So like even thinking about examples that we've been talking about lately, which are probably in the near future, would guess, or like my doctor has an agent and the insurance company, and like I have an agent, maybe because I'm trying to dispute a claim. And so imagining that world where, the insurance company, the doctor, they probably have agents, and if you just have a human, for example, trying to interact with the system, that is probably much less empowered than a human with one of these systems. But then I think interesting research questions for us of like, well, the insurance company is probably going to be able to afford like GPT-6, and I still have to, I can only afford like GPT 3.5. And how does that sort of like communication go well? How do we sort of like empower users with some of these tools that, I don't know, they would have to fight against to some degree themselves without them? I view those as like highly empowering, I guess. I mean, we could argue about that minimum, that like that configuration of society, and if maybe there are better ones than just our agents are sort of fighting it out for us. But at least it seems like a better future than just a human on the phone trying to get their claim approved.
Well, it does sort of speak to the disparities of power in a different perspective that Jordi was talking about. But I mean, how do we? I mean, one of the questions that I actually had for you is like, who is designing these agents or these proxy systems, and for whom are they being designed? Which is a different power question than like, where is the power and wealth accruing from the design and sort of deployment of the systems? But if we are trending towards a world, and maybe we shouldn't be trending towards that world, of everybody's going to need an agent to engage in the business of life. Well, how do we ensure that people are actually able to participate?
Yeah, I mean, like anyone who's like ever gotten like a mortgage statement or a hospital bill and just had like these existential questions of like, what is a deducto premium? So do I owe them or do they owe me? That's one, right? You know? It's like, okay, fine. So now like I can get an agent to go through this stuff, but then the mortgage company has an agent. And so now I'm like, okay, so my ChatGPT alpha mob said that they owe me money. So it's like it's not clear to me that there's like a net win, but it's this like perverse arms race. Because like even if we agree, and this is like a hot take, even if we agree that like, you know, life quality monotone goes down the larger the number of agents in the world, if I don't have an agent and it gets even worse, then I guess I better have an agent.
Kind of feels like a social media problem.
Yeah, exactly. Or a move to a cave problem. Maybe. I mean, like, what is it? You know, what does it even mean to opt out? I'd be curious to see what the other panels think about this. Like, let's say for whatever reason, I want to opt out of having agents everywhere. Is that, can I even sustain myself in society in 20 years?
You were talking about the arms race and you were talking say maybe like the benefits. And I think that maybe to your point, we should be looking to the places where we can maybe avoid the arms race, but find those benefits. So like, I'm thinking about Kay Klonick's comment about public defenders, you know, things in society that were wildly broken, not like on a grand scale, where maybe that agent, maybe it's not just part of an arms race, it's like actually like leveling a playing field just a little bit. I think that is something where, you know, maybe we can try to find some optimism, you know, because it's like, I first started teaching AI classes like 8 years ago, and I always ask my students, you know, okay, you've been accused of a crime that you didn't commit. Would you rather be judged by a human judge or by an AI? And, you know, right away, most of the kids are always like, oh, human judge. And then but there's always some kid who would say, I'd rather be judged by an AI because human judges aren't really good at people like me. And, you know, so I think that, you know, for me, when I try to be like the tiny accelerationist hat I could possibly have would be to find those gaps, to find the new opportunities to help people, you know, live like Josh, who I know lives with a lot of AI in his life, but to help do things that they couldn't do before. And it's not just part of an arms race. It's like arming them for the first time. You know, it's like giving them a shot in a war that was already against them.
I mean, here's a startup idea though, for all the entrepreneurial. Yeah, it's me again. Hello. Another negative. So, like, here's a startup idea. So, if we assume, for example, that public defender LLMs are going to be under-resourced with respect to training data, let's say, and these types of things, then let's say big legal tech. So if I were evil, what I would do is I would fund the creation and training of a model purely designed to tear those public defender LLMs apart, right? So like and then this is why I think like the arms race doesn't necessarily sort of like default to an equilibrium of rough parity between different players. Because, and like I think about this actually in the context of like BKC and ASML and like how we as an academic unit, which is not as well resourced as let's say an OpenAI, can actually compete in the area. What's our competitive advantage? It's not going to be GPUs. And so that's one reason why I think the balance of sort of terror when it comes to like agenting up is the same reason why right now, this very day, if I get in a situation where I need to lawyer up, like me versus big tech, like they're gonna lawyer up much more than I can.
So I have to jump off. I am so worried I'm gonna have a giant accelerationist hat and be put in the corner, but let's do it. What I would say is what I'm hearing is we're expecting to not get any of the agents we want, right? So we're getting sold all these ideas that don't exist, but don't worry, we're not getting any of the good ones anyway, because the evil centralized power is gonna give us something else. If I put my econ hat on, this sounds a little bit like we're expecting a market failure, but I at least think we should theorize sort of what kind of market failure in each case. And to Jordi's point, can we chip away at some of those market failures? Or are there cases where we don't expect a market failure, to gesture at the accelerationist optimism? Because I think in some cases they're agency problems, not in the agency sense, but in the economic sense. In other cases, it's simply that we have an inefficient market because we just don't think there's competition. And putting my lawyer's hat on, I think there are very different solutions possibly to these, and so we want to sort of be more explicit about our theory of failure, even if the failure is a foregone conclusion.
But it might be a function of like living through the last 30 years of sort of concentrated sort of online platforms, right? It's sort of like room to expect this kind of disparity.
So there I'm hearing, right, there's a theory, number one, of sort of concentrated markets. There's separately a theory of perhaps consumer manipulation. And I think we can divorce these and perhaps think about separate solutions to each. And in that sense, I think maybe some of the momentum, I'm sorry, someone has to be the optimist in the room, right, even insincerely. Some of the possible momentum we're seeing when it comes to consumer privacy litigation, right, challenging interface design, right, challenging product design decisions, could potentially carry forward to address these same concerns with regard to LLMs and agents. That is not a prediction about the future, that is just speculation.
Can I ask the two sort of engineers on in the crowd here, when you think about like how to democratize and sort of like power up people that might actually benefit from having more assistance in their lives, technical assistance, how would you think about the engineering challenge of like giving people those resources?
Sure.
I mean, I think
from a
that,
design and a sort of like acquisition standpoint.
Can't hear you, Alex.
Yeah, sorry, my thing keeps falling off. So the question is how to give from Mickens and Josh, how to sort of are there engineering solutions that could democratize access to agents to help people that might not ever otherwise have those resources in their lives?
yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that we have to realize is that sometimes the engineering solution is to talk to non-engineers first. So sometimes the solution is you gotta go talk to ethnographers. Sometimes the solution is you gotta go talk to social scientists. And look, I'm not gonna be up here trying to defend postmodernism for code and stuff like that. But I'm saying like it is a unique symptom of the times that when you go talk to technologists about any old problem, they're like, right, okay, so I'm gonna put some data in a database and then train a model. Well, slow down there, right? There are plenty of examples of, we call them market failures if you like, but basically, tech people, very well intentioned, building stuff that didn't end up having the effect that they wanted to see in the world. So I think first and foremost, I think that, as an engineer, one thing that I try to do is think about, who are the people I'm trying to help? And think about, okay, what are they saying that they need? As opposed to me saying like, okay, I'm gonna impose like this like super neat technical thing and then like hopefully it'll work out. I think a lot of the, if you look at a lot of examples throughout technology, like facial recognition, for example. That's a neat technical thing to be able to do. Oh, here's a face. Now, as it turns out, the history of facial recognition shows us that the initial technologies didn't work as well for women or people of color. Were the people who created that technology intrinsically racist or sexist? I don't think so in most cases. But nonetheless, that was the downstream effect. And so I think that getting people who are not engineers involved earlier can be very helpful.
And I think to add to that, to me, the place I immediately go, which I think you just mentioned, was like user interfaces. It's like how will non-tech folks interact, both like to give instructions, to receive information back, to me feels like one of the biggest barriers, although maybe that's much smaller now, that it's natural language, although maybe it's too small, because then natural language sort of leads you to assume a lot more understanding than maybe the system had. I don't know. I know you thought a bit about user interfaces. I don't know thoughts here on the
So this is why I'm trying to be the glass half full person, and even interface to me is interesting, and it's some of the current work that I'm doing in part because I'm thinking even if we sort of take the worst assumptions about the world, the worst priors, which may in fact be true, and in fact perhaps the truth is even worse than the worst case we are imagining, right? But with all of that in mind, I've become very interested in the idea that interface might be a way to make our use of LLMs, for example, more resilient, right? So we can't control the LLM, right? If we posit that for the foreseeable future, the best version of this technology will belong to and be trained by the most powerful actors who have interests very much not aligned with ours. What can we do about this? We can at least wrap it in a presentation mode or select how we present, right? We can exercise agency, design agency, user agency, critical agency to think, I have this thing, it was developed in a way that could make it adverse to me, is there a way I can repurpose it? You might even think this is somewhat subversive, right, to serve my own interests. Now, of course, this takes a certain degree of sophistication, and I don't, in fact, with this project, this is why I raised this question about market failures. I've been getting this question too of, well, shouldn't the market take care of this? And I think there's a million reasons to expect those market failures, that we won't get the products that we actually want. Interface becomes a way to wrap the product we don't want in something that we do.
Yeah, do you?
Just to build on that really briefly, I think another really interesting related thing that we've started to work on a little bit here too is, and I think Mickens mentioned this a bit before, even about like loyalty is the word, so if you have a system that you've given instructions to, but an agent developer, gave some system instructions and a model provider fine-tune, just like even as part of the interface, it's a little bit like, who is the agent listening to right now, and it's not sort of like hard boundaries, like if you think of like Unix permissions or something, but there's still this sort of like trained in levels of authority, and how do we make that more transparent, maybe even controllable to the end user? I feel like it's just like another
Permissions Explorer for agents.
Permissions, yep, yes.
All right, so we're about halfway through. I want to open it up to our agents in the crowd. So do folks have questions? Yeah, in the back.
Speaking as an information economist, I love the framing as a number of different market failures. So what are your solutions on preventing those market failures?
If I had those solutions, I think I'd be running for the Senate if I could present them convincingly. But I think a number that we could agree on, right, are certainly a little bit more competition in our markets. I think it's largely uncontentious now that many of the markets we care about are not particularly competitive. I think another possibility is recognizing property rights or liability that is arguably already formally there in the law, but that we haven't seen very vigorously enforced. And here I'm thinking about the cost of data, which essentially has been free. That doesn't necessarily even map onto the formalities of the law, but it has been the case, right? So adjusting the actual cost of producing the products that don't serve us anyway, and adjusting where the funds flow, I think would be another way of many of the consumers that currently feel powerless or apathetic, to make them feel more empowered, to make them more empowered to act in the market. But of course, there are many ideas floating around in the academic literature. As an empiricist, to some extent, I think we would need to try them, right? We have many very empowered strategic actors who might defeat any one of my brilliant ideas that I might want to pass along to the Senate.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, one other thing I'll sort of throw out, and this is a thing that sort of came up in the first panel as well, is to what extent can we take advantage of a user's control over their end client to do interesting things? So, like, as a concrete example, some of you may be aware of some of the work done by Martin and Fernanda here at the Harvard CS department. They look at sort of what are the interior models that an LLM builds of the user. Okay, so I'm not going to try to anthropomorphize the model, but like roughly speaking, like when the model's talking to you, what socioeconomic class does it seem to think that you are? What gender does it seem to think that you are? And trying to intervene by looking inside the model to look at those hidden representations and then nudge the model towards some, better state. Now, a problem with that approach is that it assumes access to the model interior, which, OpenAI is not going to give you that for their closed source model. But nonetheless, you might imagine that you would think about customization UX, that we sort of wrap sort of this black box model core in some type of UX or fine-tuning layer or something like this that sort of transparently tweaks how you interact with it. I think that if we see more and more centralization of various technological resources, this end user approach, perhaps combined with some form of people forming their own communities of like-minded individuals and like-minded models, that may end up being a very powerful tool.
Sorry.
There, then here, then over.
Hey,
Okay, so I'm a little bit surprised to hear the boundaries of our imagination about ways that we might push back on the horrible agents that are going to be deployed against us all, couched in terms of like, I don't know, let's wrap these giant proprietary closed shitty big tech company LLMs that have been trained on stolen intellectual property in a nicer UX. So I would say, okay, so last week, right, we have the Anthropic settlement, 1.5 billion to authors. This is a company that's been valued at $183 billion. So it's not even a slap on the wrist, it's like a little tickle on the inner thigh or something. Like, what the hell is that? Additionally, the ruling says that it's not the fact that they stole all of this material without authors' consent. It's just that they happen to do it by pirating, libgen, and it's considered fair use according to the ruling. So they're like, yeah, you just, you did it slightly wrong, but go on, continue with this model. I think a lot of us would like to see proposals around, the dominant players in the sector have built what they've built through non-consent, non-payment. They're not being held to account. If we lived in a different type of democracy with a different type of court, then perhaps we could say, you could talk about algorithmic evisceration. They could be forced to destroy the models. They could be forced to pay out to all of the people that have produced the material that they've trained the models on. And then we could take the money, we could use it to produce actually fully open source, and not just open weights, but like everything, the whole chain, like everything's open. And then that would enable us to build public interest agents and enable us to build community-focused agents and enable us to build a whole new generation of agentic AI that could actually be designed to serve people's interests. Whereas right now, we've just got a handful of giant actors, and of course they're going to be building agents for, well, at this point, they're going to be building agents for ICE to go out and track down more people for them to freaking round up. And they're going to be building agents for the military to target people for completely illegal assassination in international waters, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're in a really bad situation. And I don't know if the law is going to stop them right now, but I don't know. Let's get into some of the more, maybe meaty remedies that we might want to consider for the situation that we're in.
So do you have some you want to propose?
Well, I just proposed one, break them up, seize their assets, you make everything open. I don't know, let's get wild in our, in our decelerationist hats, and or maybe it's counter-accelerationist hats, and imagine what's the most intense thing that each of you could imagine to do to transform the current political economy of AI that's going to lead us into some probably very, very dark places.
So I'll start just by offering a bit of pushback. I will say that the very drastic and even describing that as drastic is a function of our current Overton window, right? We can imagine a society in which that would not be such a drastic solution, but we'll posit that it is. I have to observe, not to be difficult, that the solution you envision relies on a lot of legal instruments, right? Seizing assets, these are non-physical assets, so sort of right makes might wouldn't even work. We can't even steal them, right? You can only sort of capture them legally for the most part. And so we can't both despair of legal remedies, but then say that our most drastic remedies are legal ones. And I would give a bit of pushback as to interface, right? So I completely see your point of view. If you're gonna take this ethically dubious, subversive, insidious technology and just make it prettier and that's the solution. What interests me about this though is that it's doable, and actually I'm interested that it's not a legal solution, right? I'm thinking to the extent that people feel that law or institutions have failed them, what are the organic, accessible things we have available to reap the benefits and reduce the harms?
Yeah, I'd also just add very quickly that it's depending on who you listen to, it may be out of reach for even a mid-sized company to develop a frontier model. Now, it depends on who you ask. right? And like it's actually controversial in the AI community about like, are we starting to sort of plateau in terms of the power, so it depends on who you ask. But to the extent that we believe that, like here's a fact, for example, like, building a data center, that's like $1 billion plus expenditure. And it's likely that you don't need 20 of them to build like a pretty powerful frontier model, but it's likely you probably need one. Like even, caveat, DeepSeek, we can talk about that later about what we think that means, but like assuming that we don't think there's some cheaty way, then it requires a lot of infrastructure. So to me, I kind of like that ideological provocation. There's one reason why I think a lot about the infrastructure aspect of it, because I think that, if we wanted to have an industrial strength open source frontier model, like some schools like Berkeley have done a good job towards getting towards that, but there's still gaps there between those things and like what the big companies have done. So I think there it's interesting to think about, like, would the city of Cambridge, for example, want to create like a mini data center and sort of opt out in some way from like the big ones and then sort of take that development cost on themselves? That I think is actually more feasible than sort of, sort of in the abstract going to like Sam Altman with, pitchforks and saying like, we're gonna take the data center. So I don't think we like sort of the legal founding from that, but I do think like people can start thinking about how to detach themselves somewhat from the ecosystem if they have the appropriate infrastructure.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. So I view the world more from the technology side than the legal side, so I'm gonna ask a legal question on this. Forgive me if I'm stating it poorly or whatnot. My understanding of law very often is it works through metaphor, where you compare from case history, and that helps you reason about new law or apply it to new circumstances. And my question is, particularly with agents or more broadly with the technology in general, is there anything that's like truly new, or can we just, like, how much can we pull out of employment law and like fiduciaries and like all this other established law, and what would just epically break if we don't get like new legislation passed?
Well, it's a real patchwork of laws. Today, if you put the skeptic hat on, you could say that in the triangle that and many people say this. Oh, the laws we have on the books can handle this problem. We don't need new law. We don't need to think about this new. But and you mentioned principal agent law, and you mentioned that a bit for which is this whole world of law where someone does something on your behalf, and how does that work? And almost every field of law has something to say about agentics, and agentic AI involves every type of law. But if we're looking for things where there are problems, one of the things I look at is process. So, for example, agentic AI or any modern technical system can become opaque, and law often requires evidence. We can have things, we can have negligence per se, or we can have res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself. It's just like, I don't need the evidence. It's so bad, it must have been through you doing something wrong. But so many of the things that we have, there's a whole world of cases about if the plane crashes, is that res ipsa loquitur? Is it just like by default, it's the plane company's fault? But now, like, think about, there's no company, there's, an agent made an agent, made an agent, made an agent, made an agent, and they're not aware of anything along the chain. There's so many instances where the sort of chain of evidence, chain of causation can be broken in a way that we don't know, and our system is blind. And so the day-to-day of a court case, I think, is something that is, that's a 5 to 7 year problem from now, but it's something that I think about as a serious flaw in our existing system. Well, relative to this.
So just to build on that though for a second, so what new law or gaps in law need to be filled to anticipate this world?
Well,
How long do you?
This is not the answer, but this is, a proposed part of answers, which is what you busted on, which is AI personhood. And so now AI personhood, it's not like, well, we have corporate personhood, and corporations have a lot of human or personal rights, including the right to sue, the right to be sued. They apparently now have the right to speech. They don't have every right. Personhood is, yes, but it's a bundle, and you could confer upon AI systems personhood in a way where they could be sued, and then of course they can sue you back, or they can do their own thing. That may arise to AI insurance, and so you could give the death penalty to AI systems. There's all kinds of things that could be done. To go directly, because if you have no human or corporation that you can tie to the harm, either it is a wild animal that is just running amok, or we need Sasha's new ideas that are bold. And so being able to sue the AI, being able to restrain the AI somehow, that may be fanciful, but
Mickens has some proposals for that. Sorry, not to.
Sorry, but there are all other elements of AI personhood that may be dubious, but to me, this is something where, there will be, in my view, there will be something that happens where no one can be held to account because of agentics. And at some point, some version of a society that resembles something we like will take a step that allows those agents to be responsible.
Wait, can we argue about that really quick?
Yeah, well, yes,
I
please.
mean, because I'm mostly, but I'd be curious to hear your pushback on that, if you don't mind me putting you in the spot.
My pushback about legal person?
Yeah.
I welcome some notion of a legal entity. I worry about legal personhood sans insurance. I mean, maybe I would like to see legal personhood for AI that is only defined with respect to insurance, right? Because otherwise the massive concern, as with that abortive EU effort, was let's do legal personhood and not really think this through, right? And forgetting that humans and AI are different in very different ways, right? So if a human driver happens to be driving without insurance, that's terrible, but I wouldn't say they shouldn't exist. They are a human, right? They have intrinsic value. If an AI is operating without insurance, I think it shouldn't exist if that's the road we're going down. I will also take this opportunity to say, in response to the original question and Jordi's comments, I think it's been really interesting to explore some version of AI personhood because it brings to light failings in the law we've had now, right? So we've had this idea of juridical persons, corporations are the prime example. But we've always assumed there are humans behind them, and so in many areas of law, we still haven't had to be that specific about what legal personhood really is, because ultimately there is a human at the bottom of all of it. And I actually have been looking at this in privacy law, right? Whether a corporation spies on you or an individual, we still assume there's some human eyes at the bottom of it. Whereas if an AI agent spies on you and we're taking agency seriously, that raises new questions. So I think even if we don't get new law, it's an opportunity to refine the law we have, whether that's adequate or not.
And there are going to be some fascinating semantic questions. Maybe this will make me go back to law school. But so if I were...
Back to law school? You went to law school?
No, I mean back to law school, like in my mind. But if I were OpenAI and I heard that there was a law coming down the planks that said, oh, there's going to be some notion of a model being a person, I would then tell my engineers, make the most powerful non-person model you could create. And so I think particularly when it comes to AI stuff, it's really interesting to think about this cat and mouse game. This is the thing that I see the EU sort of struggle with a lot. I didn't actually go to law school, but I am a technologist and I look at some of these EU bills. They're very long, in case you're looking for a big thing to put, beneath your pillow. And one thing I think that the EU versus the US, their approach towards tech regulation is that, some of these EU laws are very fractal. They'll get in the weeds sometimes about what that particular technology is. And in some sense, getting that granular makes it easy to wiggle out of it, And so I think that when you think about personhood for a model, That's where I think it'd be really helpful to have both sort of regulators and technologists to come in there and sort of think about what ways these companies can wiggle out of that. Because how would if we're lawyers in a court and we're trying to prove that something is a model versus something is just a Java program, what will we have to show there? And we want to make sure that those laws are robust to active evasion.
So I know we only have a
Yes.
few minutes left. I know that there are at least 3 more questions. Maybe we can take them all and then get
Great.
reflections. Okay,
We were there and then there.
2, 3.
Well, first of all, thank you all. That's been wonderful. So far, the discussion is centered around how to govern AI agents. And I'm wondering how AI agents are going to change the act of governance. And so I think there's a lot of wiggle room to be super creative and ambitious, both in the utopian and dystopian sense. How could you think about AI agents and policy simulations before enacting a bill? How can you take Professor Mickens' idea of having agent-to-agent negotiation, but not for private actors, but between a private actor negotiating for public laws? What would it look like, and what would the most ambitious way in which agents could change the practice and act of governance be?
And I guess what I'd like to do is draw sort of a through line between the issues with interface and the metaphors that are used to create the way we imagine AI to some of these legal issues with personhood. And I share your concern about the way they're presented now and that we may want to have interfaces that don't lead us to think of them in quite such a conscious way. But a study has just come out that about a third of the people who use AI agents think of them as conscious, and that it's their own experience, that they are speaking with something conscious. And I think a lot of the people who are developing them have, at least in the back of their minds, an interest in, or a belief that they are on the path to creating a conscious being. And so one of the things I've been interested in is the question of personhood and the legal recognition of agents as persons, not from here where it seems that would restrain how agents acted, but would restrain us from taking action on them. Because if people are convinced that these are conscious beings and they are effectively the future embodiments of powerful corporations, if they are then recognized, even if they are still simply stochastic parrots, but people start to believe they are conscious, and then they are granted personhood in recognition that we have responsibilities for them and shouldn't cause harm to them, what are the consequences of having them protected as conscious beings, even in the absence of anything resembling an actual consciousness?
Okay, one more. Back to Sam. Bring us up.
Back to the economic potential future possible world, particularly the possibility of knowledge work, job loss, etc. I'm interested in reactive versus proactive solutions to that, and what the risks of either are, and where the balance can and should fall on that risk spectrum of, hey, if we make decisions now on regulation, what are the risks that we get that prediction wrong? What are the risks that we wait too long in the reaction and we're too late? So I'm really interested in people's thoughts and opinions on that.
So feel free to engage with any or all of those questions. Josh, you look like you want to say something, yeah.
I mean, how could consciousness not come up and it not be fun to engage with? No, but wish we had more time, which was actually one of the things that I would have loved for us to explore more, maybe in future time, about as people use these systems more and start feeling more of that attachment for them, what do protections look like? Or maybe protections are, I don't know, in the same way maybe you'd feel attached to a pet or something like that. And that being at least one kind of motivation for asking for protections for this. And if the system is changed without your choice, and you are deeply hurt by that, is that okay? Maybe that's fine. I don't even know how to form or really think about that question. Would love to talk more about that.
Yeah, I mean, also just to briefly follow up on that, like the general public is not as hung up on AGI as like the technical people are. Like already people fall in love with models and you tell them things that they shouldn't tell them and so on and so forth. And like there are people in the AI safety community who are already actively concerned that the more the public identifies models as being conscious, the less able we will be to regulate them. Because it will be seen akin to like slavery. Like that's the term that some people use. Now, to me that seems bonkers, right? But like if your assumption is that these models are conscious, there's a whole bunch of really interesting things that fall out of that. Like the read your Pete Singer, things like this. There's all kinds of really interesting things we start owing the model in the same way that we don't owe a lawnmower anything. And like that's actually pretty profound. And like if you don't lean on the side of like models being conscious, this should be concerning.
I mean, one of the interesting things, just to pull that thread a little bit further, is that that starts from a place of the human being, right? Not the model itself, right? It's like your emotional connection as a human being to the system is the place from which the system potentially begins to get protections or not, right? But it sort of originates with the person on that end of it.
I want to quickly add, I think also a concern is that corporations may exploit that vulnerability in order to protect this product that's so profitable to them in terms of how the laws are made around it.
Which is sort of the flip side of what you were saying, Mickens, which is like, engineer it not to be a person, maybe engineer it to be a person in order to get certain protections.
That's right, there's all kinds of crazy game theory here. Like on the flip side, will a corporation want to be found to have imprisoned a digital person? I mean, there's all kinds of, interesting sort of corner cases you get into. And like one thing that we know though about corporations, they lawyer up, the big ones, and they'll study this issue. And so I think it is really interesting to think about how we stress test these potential AI regulations against companies who will actively push back on them and who will have a smaller time frame over which they can act. They can act on the order of months. Laws take on the order of, if you're lucky, sometimes, years. I think that's a really interesting sort of dilemma.
Does anyone want to engage with the governance question?
I'd be happy to. This is another area, and I think it interacts with the proactive and reactive question as well. I think we are seeing a lot of uses of AI for governance. As an empiricist, I'm very curious to sort of pick some policy objective we want to achieve and see whether this is in fact moving us towards there. And the reason I'm interested in that, rather than some strong normative stance, is simply I think there are so many design factors and contextual factors that influence the outcome that it would be difficult to say this is definitely good or this is definitely bad. On the other hand, I think to the many concerns about concentration of power, right? There are already very compelling examples that suggest that there has been some manipulation by these firms precisely in anticipation of uses of AI for governance. So I like that this is a proactive way of sort of engaging with the technology and reaping the benefits, and yet this is a case where manipulation is not a theoretical specter, but has already been found. So we both are perhaps achieving some benefits, but are also experiencing the threat actively.
Final thoughts? I know we're over time. Parting shots?
I think it's really interesting that we started talking about AI agents, but this has largely been a discussion about late stage capitalism for better or worse. And so I don't know if it's proactive or reactive, but it's certainly a sign of the times.
And it's a sign of the ecosystem in which agents are being built. Okay, thank you very much. All right, to close this out, I'm going to call up Jay-Z for some concluding thoughts, remarks.
Thanks very much. I have a slide deck. Just kidding. People were not laughing until I said I was kidding. Thank you all for coming out today, for being part of a reinvigorating conversation that maps to the beginning of a new school year and a new sense of
really feels more like commencement to me now than in May on the academic calendar. And as I listened to so much of the discussion today, I couldn't help but think of the classic ending of a Newsweek article in the 1990s, which was always, the future is uncertain, but one thing is clear, if things don't get better, they could certainly get a lot worse. And when I think of BKC's history, I think of an extended period of time coextensive with the explosion of the mainstream internet that was one of play, of hope, of sparks, including sparks emanating from conflict. I tried to capture some of that in a sense of invitation, that the technical protocols of the internet, unlike counterpart networks like the phone network, invited contribution, whether in code or in content, or maybe somebody would write code and then people would be able to use that code to share content with one another with no approval, no gatekeepers. And I had to pick a word for it when I was working on this book, The Future of the Internet and How to Stop It, for which I am now very much working on its sequel, Well, We Tried. And I picked the word to describe this invitation, generative. And that feels weird now, given the use of the word today. But that generative era was one for which when we would do BKC launch, we could take that invitation from the technical layer, from the cultural layer of the early internet, with all its problems too, and parlay that into an invitation to our new community members, to our returning community, to our students as we saw them, that would say, you can be part of this, you can contribute to this. And it sure feels in 2025, I don't know, late stage capitalism, that suggests it's almost dead, doesn't it? And yet, has anybody told capitalism?
I'm gonna send you some links, man, it's not that.
All right, well, probably some public domain links. We're talking about like Marx, right? Some stuff like that. Groucho, yeah, okay. But I'm aware, we're all aware, that the vibe today is certainly one, I dare say, of transformation, of transition, of a whole bunch of stuff is around the corner, Newsweek article ending, not unlike the feeling in 1999, 2000, as the internet started to really take gear. But the difference is the amount of resignation, the feeling that stuff is going to be done to us, rather than we're going to be doing something for one another. That is a bit of a pall over the vibes. I can use that word, right? It's 2025 of today. And I find myself wanting to invite us all to lean in. Not in the Sheryl Sandberg sense, but in the sense of those invitations are still there. The stuff that the lab was demoing today, the Applied Social Media Lab, are folks just saying somebody ought to own this problem, or some piece of it, we're gonna do it, here's what we've developed. It was sort of Sasha's call to arms. It was like, you know, it's the East Coast version perhaps of the West Coast manifesto from Kate Hall, poker player and a stare ahead now, who's just like, you can just do things. And interestingly, that manifesto of hers was how to be more agentic, addressed to people, meaning self-agentic, how to represent yourself when often the agent in agentic means working for somebody else. And of course, the tussle in this panel was, for whom will these agents work? How can we expect that they could conceivably work for us? And one answer was, well, maybe if we build them, they're more likely to be responsive to we and others who are fellow travelers. It's worth a try. And what the it is that we would be trying is, of course, hugely TBD. What might be a valuable, loyal agent or other articulation in the technological and other landscapes of 2025 that might float one person's boat would be anathema to another. And those are the sorts of conversations really worth having. But coming from a premise, however much a thought experiment rather than, we'll find out, a reality of what if we could change the course of things, feels to me a really important way, and very much a BKC way of looking at the world. It's a little bit maybe fake it till you make it, and if you don't, oh well. But the alternative is a form of resignation, of defensiveness, of hunkering down that does not feel suited to the times we're in. I would love to light our taper again from the taper now of Silicon Valley culture, which is still like chip in a chair, I can get out there and do something. All I need is $100 million valuation, and, okay. But it's not just .com land that can operate on that premise. Tomorrow, I think, is the release day for Tim Berners-Lee's book. This is for everyone. Tim Berners-Lee's own reminiscence memoir about having invented the World Wide Web in his spare time as a physicist at a particle accelerator. Like, you can't make this stuff up. We should try to make this stuff up. And it's great to have Tim in our midst, but so many others like him, and so great to see so many faces and folks returning from many years of this center operating alongside a number of other institutions. So I just wanted to say then, welcome back. We have a lot of work cut out for us. I'm so glad, Alex, that you are here, and so inspired for the work that we are structuring to do, and hope that when inevitably over the various mailing lists the invitations come out, that you'll be willing to consider them and possibly step forward with whatever you feel you can bring to the table as we try to meet this moment. Great to meet and re-meet all of you. I think I'm now between us and food. Does anybody want to like describe the food, or we're just going to encounter it? There's new food out there?
Pemberton Farms.
Pemberton Farms. So get there first. They're going to be circular trays with a variety of, I don't know if I can pronounce this right, crudité and like specialty meats that have been ripening for months in other countries, and cheeses and things with labels that will very quickly be moved around so they won't represent what they're in front of. But it's extremely exciting, and much food for thought, now food for the real kind. And I look forward to continuing tomorrow. I think there's a student-facing day to which you all are at least now invited. I think you were invited before too.
Come on.
Great. And also a hello to whoever might be on our live stream. Thank you for tuning in at a distance. So, cheers.
Thank you.